Hello everyone, it's Anna, also known as Book Anna, and today our video is going to be about all the books I read in past 2 months, so January and February both. I don't think I've ever read as many books as I did for the past 2 months because I read 20 books, which to some of you may not be that many, but to me it is a lot. And I read a lot of great books. And yeah, I just want to talk about them. I'm going to try to be as fast as possible and still give you my opinion. Let's just see my stats because now I have some stats. I read 20 books. My average rating is 3.5. 8 of the books are under fantasy, 6 are under literary fiction, 5 horror, 4 fiction, and 3 thrillers, which I believe some books just go under 2 categories or something. I started reading a lot of shorter books, so they're not like 600-page books, so I kind of can get through a lot more books now. This time I just put them as I read them, so from the beginning of the year to now. So the first book that I read this year is Motherthing by Ainslie Hogarth. I gave this book 3.5 stars. When I just read it, I gave it a low rating, but then I kind of could not stop thinking about this book, so I feel like it did something good if you cannot stop thinking about a book. I gave it 3.5, and this is one of those books that is like woman's rage book where you're in first perspective of a woman who is dealing with something that troubles her and not something that's not comfortable to her, and then she kind of goes and does some not very good and great things, and she becomes not a very good human being and not very moral. And I love those books. That is one of my favorite genre of books, just like not moral people doing unmoral things. I love it. And yeah, this one was a great representation of that genre of books. The other book that I read is a lot more whimsical, and it was on my books that I need to read in 2025 because I had it for such a long time, and that would be The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie. And I gave this book also 3.5 stars. I thought it was very cute, and I thought it was very whimsical and kind of like a Ghibli movie. The only thing I had a problem with was maybe the relationship between our two main characters really evolved. Like, it was really rushed. It did not evolve over a long period of time. It was just really rushed, and I don't like it. I usually don't tend to really gravitate towards books that have romance plot as one of the main plots. This relationship taking a lot of parts in this book was not my taste, but I still think it's a very whimsical story. The next book I read is Dr. No by Percival Everett, and I gave this one a 4.75. When I picked this book up in a bookstore, it sounded so interesting to me, and I did not connect that the author of this book is the author of Trees and James. I did not connect that is the same person, and James has been on my radar for the last year since it came out, and I just am trying to find it somewhere so I can buy it or something. I really want to read it, and especially now because I loved Dr. No. When I heard people talking about Percival Everett, I didn't really hear them mentioning Dr. No. I thought before this book that I do not like satirical book like with that humoristic tone, but this one I just loved because it was kind of philosophical and it was just the right amount of satirical. I loved it so much. It's about this man who is obsessed. He's a professor and he's obsessed with nothing, and then this other guy comes to him and says, hey, you know what, I want to be a supervillain and I want you to help me steal nothing. And it's that like, and all of these talks about nothing and how nothing is something, but it's actually nothing. And it was so funny to me. I laughed out loud at a couple of moments in this book, which really does not happen to me that much. It's a very fast pace. It's not long. I think it's like maybe 200 and something pages. So yeah, it was amazing and I loved it, and I thought it's like the funniest book I've ever read, and I cannot wait to pick up James by him and the trees, because I think he is potentially one of those authors that I just want to read everything by. The next book was not that great, and that would be The Watchers. I gave this book 2.25 stars. Ugh. A lot of people recommended this book as one of those books that has the best twist at the end. I figured out the twist somewhere in the middle of the book, maybe even before that. It wasn't that great for me. It was so long. I mean, it's not a long book, it's quite a short book, but for what it was very long, because it was like all of these repetitive things happening, and I just did not like it. And then the ending came, and I liked the ending because it was finally the end of the book, and also the twist turns out I was right, so I felt good about myself because I was right all along. I'm a bit sad because I really thought this could, like this has a good twist. But also it kind of shows me that thriller books are not for me. It is very eerie, and I liked the plot. I liked like what the plot was about, what was happening with these people, and how they felt about each other, and how they didn't really like each other, but they needed to be there for one another. I liked that part, but it was just the characters were a bit flat. The next book I read is another book that is very cute. That's what I put in my review of it. And that would be I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons by Peter S. Beagle. For some reason, this book reminded me a lot of Holy Grail by Monty Python, the movie. I don't know why, because this book is not that satirical, but it had just some moments, because it's like in medieval times and they are on this quest to find drag for this prince to murder it so he can become a good prince, and the prince does not want to be prince, and the princess does not want to be princess, and our dragon slayer does not want to slay dragons, and it was just funny because of that to me. I don't think I would put this book under cozy fantasy category completely, because it was not like, it had deaths in it, it had some stakes, and I did not really understand the ending part. If you read this book, you know what I'm talking about. I did not understand what was actually happening with the Dragon Slayer, but I digress. It was very fast paced and it was funny, and yeah, I think that if you're into fantasy and you didn't pick this book up, I think you should give it a go. The next book I read is another that wasn't the best, but it was okay, and that would be Hello Beautiful by Napolitano and I gave this book 3.25 stars. The thing about this book is that I cannot say that this is a bad book. I cannot even say that I did not enjoy the book and I did not enjoy the plot. It's like historical literary fiction about a family of 4 sisters and this man that comes into their lives. It had everything that I want this kind of book to have on page. Execution of it was very, very dry, and it was very sterile. The connections that should have been very, very strong, I did not feel that at all. And it was very well written, like I said. So it was really hard for me to decipher what was wrong for me at like the end of the book, because everything was right there, and I just felt like there wasn't soul in this book, there just wasn't a soul in this book. And if I have to pick a book that represents that kind of genre, this is not the book I would pick. The next book I read, I kind of got carried away with horror, and I read a horror book that is very, very gruesome and gory, and that would be The Haar by David Sodergren. My review of this book was, it was a lot. I gave it 3.5 stars because I did enjoy it, if you can say enjoying, because I kind of had to stop it a lot of times. I was listening to audiobooks, so that did not help in me being able to get through this story, because I had to stop it every once in a while to just breathe and not throw up. I kind of realized that I don't really like body horror, And with this book, I really realized that. I really was like, okay, body horror, not for me. Got it. This book is has a lot of body horror, like a lot. And I still enjoyed it, but this I would not recommend. I feel like there's a niche group of people who like these kind of books. That's okay, that's for them. For me, I don't think I will pick this kind of book soon. I think I will let myself breathe a bit and then maybe pick up another one. It was a lot. It was definitely a lot, this book. It made me think about why, just why, you know. The next book I have is the worst book that I read this year. And I don't know if this is controversial opinion. I don't know if people pick this book up, but it was on my books that my anticipated reads of the fall last year, and it is A Dark and Drowning Tide by Allison Saft. I thought this book sounded amazing. It was dark academia, sapphic romance books, and I don't really pick romantasy, so this one sounded like, okay, this is a romantasy that I could potentially really enjoy. And I did not. There was no potential. So I know that part of dark academia stories is this sometimes murder mystery, which I do not enjoy very much. I know a lot of people do. I do not. I loved Beagle because the murder mystery part was really not there at all. And that's like what I want from my dark academia stories to be. The problem with this book was that the murder mystery part took such a long time to be figured out, and it's not even a mystery because from the beginning of the murder, you know who murdered. It's very obvious. Everybody kind of knows who murdered, and then they just don't talk about it. They just let it be, and then at the end of the book they are all, it was you? Well, yeah, why are you surprised now? Like, it was very obvious from the start who it was. And they went in this book on this journey to find a lake or something, like a magical lake. And the descriptions of nature and where they were just weren't hitting at all. I did not like them. I could not picture anything in it. It was just something about writing style. When I started reading this book, I kind of figured out, okay, this is not a typical writing style I enjoy, but I'm really interested in the plot of this book, so let's just try to get through it. If you're reading this book for romance, it's very, very slow burn romance. Romance is not the main plot. From other romantasy books that I read, romance is quite main plot in those, and this one, it's not, so don't pick it up for that. And dark academia, there are so many better dark academia books that you can pick up. The next book I read is Darkdawn by Jey Kristoff, which is the last in Nevernight trilogy. It was the worst. I liked the second book a lot. I thought it was an amazing book. I really liked the plot. I really liked the characters that were introduced in the second book. And those characters had they were still important in the third book, but they were just not executed as well. There wasn't any depth given to them in the third book, so whilst in the second book I was afraid if they are going to get killed or something, in the third book I didn't care if they were going to get killed or not. I truly did not care at all, because overall this series, I already said this, I think this series is a good series. I don't like that the main character is supposed to be 16, 17, because that's not how you act when you're 16 or 17. I kind of imagine that she's like 25 in my head, and it really helps. But yeah, that's the end of the series, and it could be better. It could have been a lot better. So this series has a romance plot, and I kind of hoped that the main character would end up with somebody else and not the person that they ended up with, because it did not make sense to me for them to end up together. I was kind of bitter about it, to be honest. But the next book I read is They're Going to Love You by Meg Howrey, and I loved this book so much. I can safely say that this book is going under my favorites category, and that this book, I don't know if it can beat All's Well, but it is right there on a second place. I have to read All's Well to be for sure, but it's there. It's there, and I love this book. I never heard anybody say anything about this book. I don't know why. It's such a great book. I got recommended this book by Goodreads. It recommended me based on a book that I gave 3 stars. I don't remember which book it was, but I remember I gave it 3 stars, and Goodreads said, oh, if you love this book, then try this book. And I was like, okay, you know what, sure, I'll try it. It has a really beautiful cover, and I gave it a try, and I loved it. By the end of this book, I just wanted to pick it up again and reread it. And I feel like this is one of those books that you can read countless times and you will always get something out of it. It's very artistic. It's about dancing, about ballet. It's about this girl who was expected to be the adult when she was not an adult, when she was just a kid, and then all the things that she did wrong were taken out of context, and she lost a lot of things. But this book really made me feel that it's okay to be average. And by that I mean, if your life isn't the best that you could have lived, but it is the life that you're currently living, and you can take the best out of that. So it may not be the best thing you could have done. You may do a lot of wrong things in it, but just take the best out of what you currently have. And I like that a lot, that it kind of had this message of it's okay if it wasn't as great as it could have been, but it was as it was, and I just have to be okay with that, and I just have to take the best out of that. I just loved the messaging, and I really liked that it showed that not being a great parent does not mean that you just hate your kid, but it can mean a lot other things as well. And yeah, it was an amazing book. It was such a beautiful book. It's very easy to read, but it's not simplistic. Again, it is kind of lyrical. If you are going to pick this book up, try to listen to the music that is mentioned in this book, because it really elevates experience. I put this book as a first pick for my in real life book club that I host, and everybody really loved this book. Everybody enjoyed it so much, and at least that's what they told me, and I'm so glad. And I feel like this is one of those books that most people would really enjoy. The next book is The Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. So this is one that has been on my radar for a very long time. It's dystopian YA. It talks about transitioning and being transgender. So this book has a lot of metaphorical things in it, and then it doesn't leave them to be only metaphorical, but then they happen really. And I just kind of thought that maybe the writer could have picked one of those things. Like, if you want to be on the nose about it, okay, but still, it's okay to just leave it metaphorically and for your readers to try to figure it out. And I feel like this book didn't really do a good job in that. Also, I kind of felt like our main character is 16, but they are just too naive to be 16, because things that are happening around them and how they decide to go with it's just, I'm sorry, you cannot be that naive. And yeah, I just felt like the things that should have been explained a bit more were not explained at all. Like the whole world, it puts you in medias res, like you are in the middle of something. There are these monsters that I did not understand how, why, when, what are they? There are just a lot of things that weren't explained that could have been, and the things that should have been explained that on the nose were explained. The next book, though, was not a letdown for me, and that would be Yellowface by R.F.Kuang. Now, I already knew that R.F.Kuang is a great writer, one of the best writers. I think I can say, because the woman can write in every genre. She can write every single genre, and it's going to be amazing. And I'm so glad that she's becoming so popular and that people have her books on their favorites of the year. I really think that it's great that an author that can give so much in their books is so popular. It was such an easy read. It was so cringe to read it. I really, because you kind of are through the whole book, you're not rooting for the main character, but you're like, okay, come on, you realize it. Please realize what you're saying. Please realize what you're doing. And she's not, and you're just like screaming in your head for her to come on. You can be smarter. You know that this is not right? And my review for this book is, this is a book equivalent of I'm not racist, but I loved the book. I really thought it made me so uncomfortable. I had to stop at some point because I was just so uncomfortable, and I was like, okay, but this woman can do, in any part of the book, she can right her wrongs, and she just chooses not to. And by the end, you're just like, okay, then you do you. And it's very hard. It was very hard to read. And because you're in her head and she's not. It's not like she's morally ambiguous or anything. She's wrong. She's in the wrong. And it just made my skin crawl because of that. It was just so hard to read, but it was so clever. It was such a clever book. And the next book I read is by Lynne Tillman. I don't know if I can say this word. It's called Weird F's. And I read last year Haunted House by Lynne Tillman, and I feel like I'm like on the verge of knowing what this author is trying to say. And I am still not right there, but like I'm so close. I'm like in realizing what she wants to say and what she wants to convey in her books. Because her books are just so weird. They're so disjointed, and it kind of reminds me of Stream of Consciousness, but it's not really Stream of Consciousness, because Stream of Consciousness would be, I looked at this and then it reminded me of that, and then and this is not like that. This is just a woman who talks about some things that happen in her life with some people, but it's so disjointed, and she goes from one to another so fast, and it was very easy to get through. It's like 80-page book, and it was easy to read it, but it was hard to follow what actually happened, and I'm still not sure. I mean, this is a plotless book. There is no plot in it. You just reading inserts of this woman's life. And that's it. And that's kind of like what Haunted House was, but Haunted House was with 3 different women. And I'm trying to realize what this author has to say, and I feel like maybe one more book and I will understand her. But for now, I'm still not there yet. But I kind of like it. I kind of like her books. The next book I read is Watermoon by Samantha Sotto Yambao. This is a book that came out this year, and I read it now. I didn't really know what this book was about, but it sounded whimsical again. It was very whimsical. It was very dreamlike. Again, it was like a Ghibli movie, like The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. But the thing about The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, it's a lot shorter book, and the pacing of the book for that amount of pages was okay, but the pacing of this book was just too rushed. So a relationship that I thought was kind of rushed in Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea here was very, very rushed, because this man knew this woman for 3 to 4 hours, and he already told her, I know you, I understand you, and I know you. And you do not know her, and don't play dumb, don't play like you do, because you do not know her. You cannot know her, and it just makes me so upset when things like that are written in the book, because you cannot do that. It's like that love on the first sight, love on the first look, I don't know, but then the world that they were in was so interesting. It was such a great world, and you could have explored it so much more, I feel like, because there are parts of this world that I don't know if they're probably taken from some kind of legend or mythology or something. They could have been explored so much more. The people that you meet that I found so interesting were there for a page and then gone. It was so rushed, and we just went from one place to another, and she wanted to show us the whole world, but maybe just pick some things and show us some things, and show us maybe more in detail those things than just showing us the whole world. So yeah, I just felt like it was very rushed, and then the ending was kind of dumb. The next book I read, I finally read it. I read The Fellowship of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I loved it. I was afraid that I will not love this book because I did not really enjoy Hobbit. I still have not read Hobbit. It's just I'm trying to get through it, and I cannot. Every time I try to read it, I just DNF it. And I thought maybe it's because of translation, because first time I read it in Croatian, but then I bought an English copy and I still did not like it. So I don't think it's translation, I just think it's a children's book, and that's okay, but it's very much a children's book. And I thought that maybe that's just the way Tolkien writes, and I just don't like it. And then I read Lord of the Rings, and I can safely say that that's not how Tolkien usually writes, and Tolkien is amazing. I am not one for traveling stories, like you just going from one place to another. When you're watching the movies, I love the movies. I now want to rewatch them again, but when you're watching movies, you can see everything, and I was kind of afraid that all of that nature that you see in the movie and that is so vivid, that I will not be able to convey it. The book will not be able to convey it in the way that movie can, but it did. It actually did. And I could picture everything, and even the parts that movie kind of took out that did not show in the movie, weren't shown in the movie, I could imagine them quite easily. And I just loved it. And I cannot wait for the second book, but I just don't want to rush this series. I don't want to read them all back to back. And then, so I can just say that I read Lord of the Rings. I kind of want to take a step back now and read some other books and then go back to the world, because I know now that this is already one of the most favorite series in movies, so of course it's going to be in the books, I feel like. The next book I read is I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the second book that I read by Stephen Graham Jones. Actually, the first one I DNF'd, but I read like most of it. I give this book 3.25. Something about his writing style is just not for me. It's very hard for me to read it. I don't know why. The plot of this book is so interesting again, but it's so sad. I actually did not think this book is going to be so sad, to be honest. This man loses everything based on something that he could not even control. It's a very memorable book. I will definitely not forget this book ever, because it's the character has such a unique voice. And I did not read a lot of characters that had such unique voices in which you can always kind of differentiate him from anyone else. I loved that, and the pacing of this book, the chapters are maybe a bit too long because every chapter had like 70 pages, but that's fine. I will give him another chance, definitely, because a lot of his books sound like something I would really enjoy. The next book I read is Shark Heart by Emily Habeck. This one I gave 3.5 stars. I thought the premise of this book was, again, very cool. It's about this man who is turning into shark. The world is the same as ours, just these mutations happen to exist, where people mutate in some kind of animal. I thought that the book is going to be about him turning into shark, and about how his wife and him are dealing with it. And that part of the book was kind of lost and was not that long. A big chunk of the book was about Ren's, that his wife's name, mom, and her life. It kind of let me down because of that, because I really wanted the book to explore him. I loved him as a character, and he wasn't on the page that much. He's like an actor and a professor, and he loves acting, and he never could have written a play right, and then he starts turning into shark, and now his life is over, and then he becomes a shark. And I just wanted the whole book to be focused on him and not be focused on Ren's mother. The thing that I loved about this book a lot was different kinds of writing styles, because the part of the book was written as a dialogue, like in drama. A lot of parts of the book were just like very short paragraphs of things that are happening, and then you just move on, and I loved that. And the other book that I read that was also kind of written in different styles was Mrs. Death, and this one I gave 4.5. This is such a well-structured story. It's a story that talks a lot about death, and it's again one of those books that doesn't really have a plot. It's just about this woman who talks with Mrs. Death about death, and she is transcribing Mrs. Death's stories about all of these people that died and should not have died. And one thing that really stuck with me when I finished this book, I don't have the exact same quote, but it was something about how we as people are so afraid of saying that somebody died. We thought about so many words that we can put in the place of died. So we say, oh, they passed away, or they're not with us anymore, but we don't really want to say they died. That's something that kind of really, I thought, yeah, that's really true. The book is full of very, very smart, memorable quotes, and I really want to read this book again and annotate it, because I realized that when I read the book for the first time, I don't really like annotating it, but if I read it again, then I love annotating it the second time I read it. And this is one of the books that I definitely want to read again and annotate it and pull out all those quotes that I really enjoyed. 2 more books. I've been filming for an hour. The next book I have is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. This is a great book. I gave it 4 stars. I listened to the audio version, so I think that it would even have more stars if I read it, but I sadly could not get my hands on like ebook or a physical copy still, so I could only find an audiobook. I have not read many books. As I said, I have not read many literary fiction books with male main character. Usually it's female, and I loved that this was something different for me. It's very diverse, and it's about this man, Cyrus, and he's Persian, and he decides that he wants to write a book about martyrs. And then he finds this artist. She's dying in a museum, and she's for her last art. Her last art piece is talking with people in a museum, like Marina Abramovic had, just watching people. She's now talking to people, and that's her last act as an artist. And he goes into New York in MoMA. He talks to her, and they just talk, and we are in his head. He's a very in-depth character. He's a struggling alcoholic and drug addict, and is now sober, and it's very hard for him. He has such an interesting job. He's like an actor in a hospital where he works with interns that need to tell families that somebody is sick, like their loved one is sick or is dying, and he's the one that portrays those people, and then they first tell him so they can learn, and then he needs to act like his loved one is sick. We are in his perspective, and then we go back and we learn about his family in Persia and how his mom grew up and her brother, how they grew up, and even his father. It's such a memorable book. It has so many layers, and I really want to read. And the last book that I read, Nina by Nino Cipri. This is a short sci-fi book. It's like 100-page book, and I believe it's a duology, and now I have to read the second book, but the second book is also like 100 pages long. It was a bit rushed because it's so short, but it wasn't that rushed. I thought it was a good sci-fi book. So this book is happening in this IKEA-like store. There are sometimes wormholes kind of happen in the store, and then some customers go in those wormholes, and then people that work in this store, the workers, have to go get them. And it talks about capitalism and how, these people, these workers, this is not their job. This is not in their job description, but if they don't do it, they are going to be fired. So they have to do it. And it talks about how, we're all in capitalism. We're all involved in it, whether we like it or not. And we are not free to do whatever we want on the workplace. And you cannot say no, because if you say no, you're going to get fired. So you don't actually have that freedom. So now they have to go and rescue this grandma that was lost in this wormhole, and the other worlds are all in the same place, this IKEA-like store, but just in one of them, for example, furniture is sentient and it eats people. So that's great. But yeah, it was very easy to read. It was very simple. It's a very simple book, but I enjoyed it, and I want to read the second one as well. Those are my reviews of those 20 books that I read. I'm pretty happy with the beginning of the year with my reading. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for watching my video, and See you next time. Bye!